Thank you for joining me and welcome to Paranormal Mysteries. I'm your host, Nick Ryan. On today's episode, I'll be sharing experiences which include a dark entity in a corn maze that follows the author home, a mysterious group of spirits walking on the side of the road, and a listener that has multiple paranormal abilities. But before we start, I'd like to thank Lindsay for their support and generosity. And remember that anyone can show their support simply by sharing and reviewing the podcast. Or if you'd prefer to make a monetary contribution, you may do so through our Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, or PayPal donation links. And if you have a paranormal experience to share with me, you may contact me by email at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, through voice message at speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries, or on our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. And all of our support and contact information can be found in the show notes. Also keep in mind that I am in the process of reorganizing my recording studio, and because of this, you may notice a change in audio quality in this and our previous episode, as I finish this transition. And now, let's start the show with our first listener story of the night, which comes to us from Charles. And Charles's story is called Paranormal Abilities and Gifts. Charles says, "Hello again to the listeners and to you, Nick. I was browsing the forum and saw someone ask about people with paranormal abilities and gifts, also known as ESP or extrasensory perception. This is something I don't like to talk about. It not only scares me because of how people may perceive me, but I also do not want to draw the wrong attention to myself. I also feel it's important to state that I do not follow any religion. I follow all of them. I pick and choose what I want. You might say that I am spiritually conflicted. I do not know how I know this, but this began when I was 3 years old. It has been on my mind a lot lately, and I have been thinking about it every day for the last few weeks. When I was 3 years old, I lived with my family in a 2-story house with a basement. I started to have dreams that I would go to the basement at night and visit with a green entity. Now, when I say green entity, I mean just that. It was like a light, but it had form. It was bright green. It felt unnatural, and it kind of scared me, but it was friendly and teaching me things. We would sit at a table under the landing, and I distinctly remember playing chess with the entity. After the dreams went on for a period of time, I started to get a strange feeling when I was in the basement. I would look at the table there and wonder if it really was a dream. So one night before bed, I closed the basement door and locked it. I went to bed and had the dream again. When I awoke, the first thing I did was go to the door, and it was wide open. These were not dreams. Now I realized that my parents or my brother could have opened the door, but it was something I can feel that happened. It's strange that these memories are so deeply implanted into my memory, yet they are foggy at the same time. After I figured out that they weren't just dreams, the entity stopped visiting with me. I feel like the entity opened up something in my mind, and the following are examples of my ESP. I am energy sensitive, I am an energy manipulator, I have precognitive abilities, and I can read minds. For the most part, I have zero control, except when I am in tune. Being in tune is a feeling. The best way to describe it is the feeling you feel when you first fall in love. It's a cloud 9 high. Let me start with energy. Have you ever walked into a room and sensed when someone is angry? When people are displaying negative energy, it gives off a 50-foot radius from the person. When somebody is very happy, the aura is only 10 feet. Now, this is not my ability. This is the world we all live in. Some people can project that aura, or redirect that energy. Some people are empaths and can feel that energy physically when they touch someone. I can mentally feel the energy a person gives off and the energy objects give off. I can touch someone and drain them to give me more spunk if I'm tired, but doing so makes them tired. I'm the type of person that has contagious moods. If I'm happy, everyone is happy, and vice versa if I'm feeling foul. But my radius is much larger than the 50 feet and 10 feet. Sometimes I can physically see the energy as an aura. I have gone to casinos on more than one occasion, and the winnings machine have a golden hue, and I will play as many slot machines as I can before it wears off. I'm not talking 2 or 3 lucky slots. I will play 15 or 20. I will walk up to a slot with a $20 bill, max bet, hit the bonus with 2 or 3 pulls, cash out, next machine. This seldom happens, but when it does, my brain will tell me that I should go to the casino. I can feel the energy of people who practice Wicca. I was at a friend's work party as a guest, and I met this woman for the first time, and I instantly felt something different about her. After we had chatted for a bit, I casually asked her if she was Wicca. She was shocked and said, "Yeah, how did you know?" And I said, "Because I can feel it." Now, that is not something that I casually ask people, but when they are around, I know who they are. I experience a lot of SLM, or street light phenomena. That is where stoplights seem to change color for you, or street lamps go out or turn on when you're near them. I am a very heavy sleeper. I have crazy vivid dreams. Sometimes my dreams are out-of-body experiences. I talk in my sleep. I scream and I yell. One morning I awoke and my other half asked me what I was dreaming. I didn't remember. He said I told him that I was a blade of grass and the carrots were trying to eat me. I just wanted to include that so that you get an idea of what kind of dreams I have. I used to have a bedroom in the basement. I had a glass-framed picture on the windowsill to block out the light from the window. I was sleeping one day and had a dream that I walked into my bedroom and turned on the light. Then it exploded with glass and blinding light, and it instantly woke me up. The picture frame had fallen from the window and shattered on the concrete floor. This had happened at the same time I was dreaming. When I turned on the light in my dream and the light was exploding and blinding me, the picture had fallen at that exact moment, and the sun was coming through the window, hitting me in the face. I was very freaked out. This was an isolated occurrence, but because I do have very intense dreams, I try to analyze and ponder them. One time I was the passenger while my friend was driving. We were in heavy traffic, and this car pulled up next to us as the stoplight was turning red. Without missing a beat, I turned to him and told him to watch out for that car. The stoplight then turned green, and as he hesitated to let the car next to us pull ahead, the car swerved violently towards us and almost hit us. When I first discovered that I could read minds, I worked with this girl at a restaurant. She was a waitress that I didn't talk to a lot, and for some reason I just asked her with full confidence, "How was the movie last night?" And she replied, "I didn't go to a movie." To which I said, "Yes, you did. You went with your boyfriend." She turned pale, got spooked, and her tone changed. "How the hell did you know that?" I said, "Because you were thinking it." "Oh my God, that's creepy," she exclaimed, and continued to ask me all night how I knew that she went to a movie. I try to stay out of people's heads, but I will say it's useful during job interviews. I'm not sure if it's because I'm so sensitive to energy that I can tap into people's thoughts, or if it's in the same realm of what mentalists do. These are just a few specific examples of things I have experienced. I still experience things, but it has become so normal for me that I tend to miss the details until after the fact. I am a very analytical person that tends to overthink. I had a lot of depression problems when I was younger because things would happen and I had no control. It drove me crazy. So I don't think about stuff anymore. I try to shut it off and ignore it, and I know that I should embrace it, but my mind cannot process normal everyday thoughts and decisions without overanalyzing. For me, it was the how and why. I am an Aquarius who was born on February 17th. I was my grandparents' 17th grandchild. I have green eyes, and only 2% of the world has green eyes. I study numerology, aspects of religion, gemstones, and tarot. I have books on witchcraft. I've done spells, and everything I looked at yielded no answers. And to make it more complicated, both of my parents had a lot of supernatural and paranormal experiences, which has passed on to their children. I have been stalked by a cult. I have seen the ghost of the Virgin Mary. I have seen UFOs. My life has been very enriched with experiences dealing with supernatural and paranormal. My siblings are gifted as well, as was my mother, and as is my father. But what I can't wrap my head around is when I was 3. Something about it feels off, and if I have learned anything, it's that my sensitivity isn't wrong. Thanks again, Charles. Our next story of the evening comes to us from Carly. And Carly says, "Hi Nick, Thank you for letting me share my first story with you. It felt really good sharing it. I don't tell many people my experiences with the paranormal because I am afraid of judgment. After I shared my first story with you about John, the man with the black top hat, I felt like a weight had been lifted off of me, like I finally let it out. I don't have many people to share my stories with, so I hope you don't mind me writing to you again to share another story with you and your listeners. I had briefly mentioned in my previous story about seeing a bunch of people walking down the side of the road when I was on my way home from figure skating practice. This is probably the most intense experience with the paranormal that I have ever had. It was right before dusk. The sun was just starting to set, but the street lights hadn't come on yet. It was summertime, and there were hardly any vehicles on the road with me, as I live in a rural area. I was driving down a windy highway, which follows a river on one side, and the other side is mostly farm fields. I was approaching a farmer's market on the left, and not too far past that market on the right-hand side of the road, which was the riverside, is a really old historic stone house that has been turned into a museum, which also has a really old family burial site on it. As I approached the farmer's market, I saw a group of maybe 8 to 10 people walking down the side of the highway. I slowed down, wondering what was going on, afraid that maybe there was a bad car accident. Once I got up to them, I realized that they weren't actually there. I should note that even though I knew they weren't actually there, I still saw them as clearly as I can see anyone else. They looked like they were actually there. I don't know how to explain it, but I just knew. Anyway, I pulled into the farmer's market parking lot, which was empty since it was closed, and the group of people followed me into the parking lot. I thought I was hallucinating and I didn't understand what was happening, so I decided that it was best that I stop driving. I shut my car off, facing the river across the road, and then called my parents and asked them to come and pick me up, as I wasn't able to drive, and I was only about 5 minutes away from home. As I waited for my parents to come and get me, the group of people had finally reached my car and surrounded my vehicle. They looked sad and distraught, like something terrible had happened and they needed help. I closed my eyes and tried to make them go away, but then I suddenly felt like I was in a dream. Everything around me changed. The people were still outside the car, but instead of everything around me being dull in color, it was suddenly very sunny and bright, and I could see everything crystal clear. There were butterflies and birds chirping, and it felt very euphoric. A complete sense of calm and peace came over me. Then there was a woman standing just outside my window. She didn't look sad anymore. She looked at peace, and she gestured for me to follow her as she started walking away from my car. In the dream, I got out of the car, and the woman, along with the rest of the people, led me across the road and down into the river. The river only came up to my waist when she paused and turned to look at me. She smiled at me, and I felt like she was trying to comfort me. Then she said, "It's okay now. You're safe." And then as I took one more step toward her, I slipped under the water and started sinking. Except, I didn't panic. I looked up toward the surface and I could only partially make out her face, looking at me. Then I felt myself fading, sinking deeper and deeper until everything around me was dark, and the light from the surface looked far away now. I tried to take in a deep breath, and water filled my lungs, and then I woke from the peaceful dream and felt like I was drowning in real life. I started panicking because I couldn't breathe. Then I was back in the dream, at peace, and calm again. Everything was black. I could hear the silence of the water in my ears, and I still couldn't breathe, but it was okay. I didn't hurt anymore. I thought that maybe I was dead. Then, suddenly I was back in my car, crying. I looked at the woman who was now also crying, and I said, "I don't want to die." And then she put her hand on my window and said exactly what she said to me in the river. "It's okay now. You're safe." Then I heard a light knock on the other window, and all of the people then disappeared, and I could see my brother and my mom, and my brother was yelling my name and banging on the window. I don't remember anything after that. Later that evening, back at home, I got up to go to the washroom, and I heard my parents talking. My mom was explaining what had happened when she and my brother went to pick me up. I heard her say, "You need to take her to see someone. I have never seen anything like that. She didn't look like herself. You should have seen it. You didn't see what Cody and I saw. That wasn't her in that car." I later learned that my mom had our house cleansed shortly after the event because she was afraid of the possibility that something had attached itself to me and followed me into our home, which I thought was odd for my mom. I can't picture her getting our house cleansed, so whatever the situation looked like from her perspective, it must have really spooked her. I asked my brother about that night months later, and he said the same thing as my mom. He said that my eyes were rolled back in my head when they first got there, and they thought that I was having a seizure. But then my eyes came back, and he said that my pupils were completely black, and my face looked off somehow. I asked him to explain this further, but he said that he didn't know how to, just that it didn't look like me. And then he said that I started crying, and he said it looked like I was talking to someone, but no one was there, and he couldn't make out what I had said. Then I looked at him, stopped crying, and unlocked the door for them. He said that I fell asleep on the way home. When I spoke with a medium about it, the one who thought that I had strong psychic abilities, she said I experienced exactly what had happened in that spot, which happens when something really tragic takes place and the energy of the events gets stuck there, almost like they're stuck in a loop. I forgot what she called it, but I guess there's a name for it. There's quite a bit of history around that area, especially along the river, including a battle from World War I, about 5 kilometers from that location. I think if someone did drown in that area, it was likely before 1926. That's when the little stone house just down the road was purchased by a woman named Sarah Gamble and her husband, Stanley Gamble. Sarah and her baby died during labor, and her husband married another woman later on named Annie Eldred. Their nephew now owns the property. He's the one who taught me about all of the history around the area, including the old burial ground and unmarked graves, as well as an old church that was there at one time, but had burned down long before the cottage was built in 1870. It would be cool if I could find a record of a drowning in that area, just to prove my vision, but I guess not all of our experiences will have proof. I wonder who drowned, when, and why. Who were the people in my vision? Family members? Neighbors? Community members? I have a feeling that the person who drowned was young, but that's it. And it's just a feeling, so who knows? Anyway, thanks again for listening and sharing. I really enjoy hearing stories from other listeners as well. Our next experience of the night comes to us from Karina, and Karina's story is called A Shadow Lurking in the Corn Maze. Karina says, "Hi Nick, I love the show. I always find myself listening to it while at work. Listening to everyone else's experiences made me decide to share my own. This happened back when I was in high school. I was a sophomore at the time, and my best friend Chantal was a junior. We weren't driving yet, so my mom had to take us places. This was during October, and there is this town that holds a corn maze and other attractions for Halloween, of course. I think it was a Friday or a Saturday, and my mom drove my friend and I to the corn maze and dropped us off. It started off like any basic girl teenager's hangout. We did the other attractions during the light out because we wanted to be scared during the haunted corn maze, as they called it. So, fast forward to the maze, it starts off normal as we follow a couple of people, and the actors pop out to scare us. It was completely normal at first, and then we noticed that we couldn't hear people near us as well as we did before. We shrugged it off because it's a maze. It wasn't the scariest maze out there because you could see the actors hiding in the corn before they'd pop out. So we figured we were going the right way because we could see a shadow or a silhouette of a person in the corn. They could be standing, crouching, or even laying on the ground, and you could clearly see them. But as we would get closer to it, it would run away, and you could hear the corn shuffle as if someone was running through it. Well, we saw this figure at least 4 times before an actual employee caught up to us and told us that we would have been really lost if we were back in the back area of the maze, and no one goes that far out. So right there we got spooked, and we told him that we were just following the shadow, thinking that it was one of the actors. That's when he told us that no one works out where we were. What was weird was during the time walking back with the employee, we felt like someone was following us. So he walks us back, and we finish the maze, still trying to figure out what we had been following. We then call my mom to tell her to come and pick us up, and that we're done with the maze. But whatever that thing was ended up following us back to my home. Chantal was staying over that night. We went to bed like normal, but still with an uneasy feeling as if we were being watched. We both fell asleep at some point, and my friend had to get up and use the bathroom. She turned on my room light, which she never does, but she told me that something within her core told her to turn it on and then run to the bathroom and to not look around the living room. My room was in the basement, and the living room or family room was right outside of my door. Well, she does this and runs to the bathroom. I sleep with a pillow on my head so the light didn't bother me too much, but this is where it really scared me. Chantal left my door open, and from the furthest wall in the living room, which was pitch dark, I saw a creature which was darker than black run with such speed, and it was on top of me before I could really see what it was. I'm freaking out because I can't move anything, and I can't really speak. It had 4 arms, 2 holding my arms down, 1 holding my neck, and the last one holding my head still. I could feel what I thought were legs wrapping around my legs. I'm trying my best to yell, "Get off of me, you are not welcome, leave me alone," but it only came out like soft murmurs. It was enough for my friend to hear from the bathroom though, and she hurried to flush the toilet. The creature hears it flush because it stopped shaking me, and I can kind of see it turn towards the bedroom door. It hears my friend coming out of the bathroom, and it flies into my closet. As soon as it gets off of me, I sit up right away trying to catch my breath and comprehend what had just happened. As Chantal walked in and was closing my door, through a small crack, I could see it leave the room. Nothing like that has happened again, and I think that it's wild that my friend could hear me in the bathroom. We both don't know what happened, and we are both big believers that whatever we were following at the corn maze definitely followed us home. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. Karina. As we bring tonight's episode to an end, I appreciate everyone for tuning in, and a special thank you goes out to Charles, Carly, and Karina for sharing their experiences. And if you've witnessed something paranormal, I'd like to hear your story. You may contact me through email, voice message, or on our website via the links in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and I look forward to seeing you back here on Friday as we continue our journey into the unexplained, right here on Paranormal Mysteries.
Start your car buying journey today at Woodhouse Ford and experience the difference. Our team is ready to help you get the job done with our full lineup of all new 2022 trucks. The 2022 F-150, Ranger, and Maverick are built tough and ready to tackle whatever lies ahead. Shop online anytime at WoodhouseFord.com or visit us in Blair, Omaha, or Plattsmouth. Woodhouse Ford has something for everyone.
To show you how easy it is to file a claim with Geico, we hired a nature show host.
In the native habitat of a suburban driveway, the poor victim of a broken windshield is left assessing his vehicle, utterly helpless.
Well, not true. If he's got Geico, he can file a claim online, over the phone, or with his handy mobile app.
But like a lone gazelle, he'll suddenly be left to fend for himself, awaiting his terrible fate.
Nope. Geico will assign him a designated claims team to help him out, too.
So the gazelle gets his car fixed and everything. Wow, nature is so cool.
Geico. Great service without all the drama.
Thank you for joining me and welcome to Paranormal Mysteries. I'm your host, Nick Ryan. On today's episode, I'll be covering ghosts, alien abduction, a bizarre nighttime visitor, and a military witch. But before we start, I'd like to thank everyone for their support and generosity. And remember that anyone can show their support simply by sharing and reviewing the podcast. Or if you'd prefer to make a monetary contribution, you may do so through our patreon.com, buymeacoffee.com, or PayPal donation links. And if you have a paranormal experience to share, you may contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, through voice message at speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries, or on our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. And all of our support and contact information can be found in the show notes. And now, let's start the show with our first listener story of the night, which comes to us from Mike. Mike says, "Hi Nick, I've been listening to your show and submitted a couple stories from my past. This time I'd like to submit a much more recent story. But first, some history. I lived in a rented ranch-style house for about a decade. It was a good size, inexpensive, had a big fenced-in yard and 2.5-car garage in a decent area, and the rent was never raised in the 10 years that I lived there, which partially explains why I lived there for so long, even though both myself and my dog would see, hear, and even physically feel things. After I moved from there, I lived in a couple different places. In one house, I woke up on a Saturday morning and stumbled into the living room to find a child's handprint in the carpet under the coffee table. That was weird because there was no child there. Weirder still was about an hour or so after I woke up and saw it, it simply disappeared. But what made it even more weird was that when I went into the attached garage to my car, the same handprint was on the hood of my car. I lived at that house for a few years before moving south to Florida. Due to my job, I lived in a couple different cities in different areas of the state. Eventually, I made my way to Orlando. My friend bought a home there and needed some roommates to help with the mortgage, so myself and another friend moved in. The house was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single-story home. It was a nice size for us and was the typical, relatively new Florida house with high ceilings. To better understand what happened there, I have to describe the house. The house was longer than it was wide, and the front door and garage situated facing the road. When you walked in the front door, immediately to the right was a bathroom, and on the other side of that were 2 of the 3 bedrooms. Walking in the front door, you'd walk down a foyer area into an open concept-style living room/kitchen. If you continue walking, you'd walk through the living room. To your right is the kitchen, and to the left, the 3rd bedroom. Continue on and you walk out the sliding glass door into the backyard. The living room was situated so that when you'd watch TV, the kitchen was directly behind you. On multiple occasions while watching TV, off to my right, towards the 2 bedrooms and front door, I'd see something out of the corner of my eye. It looked to me like 3 glittery or shiny balls of light that were different sizes and slightly smashed into an oval or almond shape. They seemed to be at the very top of the ceiling, which was much taller than a person, and when I turned to look at them, they seemed to duck around the corner and out of view. A few years prior to moving to Orlando, I lost my previous dog of 18 years. I missed him greatly, and after a couple dogless years, I decided it was time for another. I picked a dog from the local rescue and brought her home. Not too long after that, I met someone and we were married. I moved him in the place I was at while we saved some money for our own place. So now there were 3 of us and a dog in the same house. At this time, I was working weekdays, 10 to 7. Around 6 or 6:30 one evening, I got a text from my roommate asking if I was home. I replied that I wasn't, and I asked why. He said he'd tell me more once I got home. After I got home, I asked him what was up, and he said that while he was watching TV, the dog was sitting off to his right, slightly in front of him, staring back into the kitchen intently. A few seconds later, one of her toys came flying through the air at her. She jumped and caught it while playing with it. It surprised him because he didn't know that I was home and turned to say something to me. But there was no one there. That's when he texted, asking if I was home. A few months later, I woke up early and was sitting on the couch killing some time before I had to go to work, playing on my phone when, off to the right, I heard deep breathing, almost snoring. Immediately, I thought it was my dog asleep, but she was in the bedroom sleeping. I then thought it was my roommate's dog, but she was in his bedroom sleeping. I then realized I was the only one awake, and when I looked to my right, the breathing noise stopped. This area is the same area the dog was looking at when her toy came through the air towards her earlier. A few weeks later, we were sitting on the couch watching TV when my husband looked to his right, got up, and started looking around in the kitchen. I asked him what he was looking for, and he said that he had heard breathing. My husband's culture is highly superstitious and doesn't like to discuss such things, so I never told him about either of my experiences with the noise or the dogs. This past year, my dog, husband, and I moved out of Florida to a northern state. After a month or two in the new place, we went to dinner. When we returned home, as usual, we took the dog out for a walk, and when we arrived back inside, she immediately went to a spot in the middle of the floor and started sniffing. Upon investigating, we found an old chicken nugget from a certain fast food restaurant in the middle of the floor. Neither of us eat those nuggets, and the dog, having been in the house alone for the previous hour or so, would have already seen it and eaten it. It seemed it appeared during the 30 to 40-minute dog walk. A few days later, we noticed the towel hanging in the bathroom had what looked like small blood droplets on it. Neither of us were bleeding, and even if we were, we certainly wouldn't have used a white towel for any blood. A few days after that, when we returned home, a plant that had been sitting on the floor fine for a couple of months was toppled over with no apparent reason. A week or so later, the kitchen table had several water droplets in the middle of the table when we woke up one morning. We searched the ceiling and found no evidence of water leak from above. This happened for 2 to 3 more days, and then stopped. The most recent things that have happened was, while on the couch, the dog would look back down the hallway with a concerned look on her face. The last time, I turned my head to follow her gaze and said, "Go away," loudly, to whatever she was looking at, and she seemed content after that. That was last week, and so far this week things have been normal. To people with pets, I'd advise them to pay attention to your pets. They oftentimes seem to know more about what's going on around you than you do. Our next story of the night comes to us from Marlene, and Marlene's story is called Ufo Abduction. Marlene's story may be a little graphic for some listeners, so please be warned. Marlene says, "Hi Nick, I have been listening to every episode in your podcast, and I feel that it is my turn to contribute to the show. I was born in Venezuela and was adopted to Sweden when I was 11 months old. Fast forwarding to about 2 weeks after, I celebrated my 8th birthday. My birthday is the 11th of September. That night, 2 weeks after my birthday, I had what I thought at the time was a very strange dream. Now I know that it was a UFO abduction. And it began like this. I was in my bed and trying to go to sleep when I was drifting off, when suddenly woke up in a very bright room. I was standing in the middle of a bright, round room and big tanks with some sort of liquid, and humanoid creatures were positioned alongside the wall. I could hear a very low humming, and my feet felt cold. I started to look around the bright room when I saw him approaching me. He looked like a little devil with black, very straight hair, horns on each side of his head, big round ice blue eyes, and he was short and had skin that shifted in light brown and red. He told me that they wanted to have someone to help them with the babies, someone to give birth to them and to nurture them. The strangest thing was that he spoke Swedish, but he didn't move his lips at all. I could hear his voice in my head. He then looked behind him, and another creature that looked like him, and must have been a woman, walked up to him, and in her arms was some sort of caterpillar creature that had human eyes, lots of arms, and green fur all over its body. When I saw this ugly baby creature thing, I felt provoked, angry, and I remembered how tired I was, and that I just wanted this terrible nightmare to end. So I took the small creature baby thing, threw it on the floor, and jumped on it. I didn't stop until the small creature was a wet spot on the floor. Then I looked up and looked the man straight in the eyes, and I said, "I am tired, my feet are cold, and I just want this strange and very unpleasant nightmare to end now." The man then looked at me and said that it was for the best that he returned me to my bed. When I opened my eyes, I was in my bed and my mother was standing over me, and she asked me where I had been. She said that she had been in my room 10 minutes ago checking up on me, but I wasn't in my bed. I grew up in a house with 2 floors, so she went downstairs to see if I was on the toilet, and when she couldn't find me there, she decided to go back upstairs to my room, and this is when she found me sound asleep in my bed. As I am writing this, I am 36 years old, and I have tried to forget about this abduction, but I cannot. Thank you, Nick, for the podcast, and thank you all for contributing with your stories. Best regards, Marlene. Our next experience of the night comes to us from Dawn, and Dawn's story is called Confessions of a Military Witch. Dawn says, Merry meet. I'm a mother of 4, retired U.S. Army officer, and school teacher of many years. However, none of that for your audience would even be remotely interesting were it not for my lineage as a hereditary witch. Aside from a few years where I set aside my practice of the old religion and tried the new one, I have walked, lived, and grown all my life, weaving in and out of the borderlands, where death and life mingle. One could easily say, my life is dark and paranormal. There are so many misconceptions surrounding those who follow the witch's way, but it is not my purpose here to address the stereotypes and ignorance that mainstream society attaches to us. It is my purpose to relate a few episodes from my lonely soul travel that remain creepy and hitherto still unexplained. Around 10 years ago, I had just returned from another combat tour to the country of Iraq. It was with great joy that I removed the tarp from my old Jeep and threw my gear in and motored out to my farm. I had been gone for over a year. My farm, as the kids and I refer to it, was a farm 50 years earlier, but now was just a solitary house at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by spooky wetlands and forgotten woods. It was so remote, and you could just see one light from the porch burning in the distance from a barn door 2 fields away. We loved it there, sitting in front of our wood stove, drinking dry red wine, and listening to owls hooting at the stars above. It was the perfect location to practice witchcraft without having to hide from prying eyes. We were lucky to even have one car pass by on any given day. While stationed in Talil Air Force Base, or Camp Adder, Iraq, months earlier, I had become enamored by the idea of conducting an evocation of a spirit to full physical appearance. This is a rite where the witch employs devices gleaned from old grimoires to coax a spirit to either use a medium, i.e. copious amounts of incense, or messenger, i.e. willing human host, to manifest in and perform feats on behalf of the magician. The work is ancient, creepy, and efficacious in the hands of one who is well practiced. The impetus for this path of inquiry began when visiting the archaeological dig site of the Ziggurat of Ur, located with the base. This building is a temple where the priest would ascend and commune with the Sumerian moon god. There are the ruins of a grand palace, royal courtyards, wealthy homes, and ornate tombs in the shadow of the Ziggurat. On a previous tour, my spirit guide told me that I would return to that place again. And sure enough, 7 years later, not only did I return, I could see the Ziggurat out of my office window where I worked every day. A witch and old pagan shrine? Moth to a flame. During times of meditation and trance states, I saw a great colossus of a spirit rise up frequently from the Ziggurat. He looked to be a 50-foot dark minotaur, muscular and foreboding. He would proudly walk with enormous strides around the airbase, especially during times of a red crescent moon or dust storms. In addition, there was the spirit of a veiled lady who started presenting to myself and a male witch I simply called Wendell. She was becoming ever-present, and when he mentioned during a circle meeting that he was being visited by her too, I thought about all I was learning concerning evocation. When he said that her veil was made up of nothing but the night sky, I was hooked. When I saw her, that was my perception too, a hollow emptiness cloaked in nothing but stars. So, we set up a meeting. I will spare you all of the details, but suffice it to say that I made the preparations to evoke this mysterious lady into Wendell. We had about 15 other service members who were practitioners of some form of earth-based religions who wanted to attend. I started the ritual, grimoire in hand, using all of the energy the group was focusing toward the intention, confident yet a little apprehensive as to what would, if anything, actually happen. Chant, chant, visualize her, I thought to myself. There was a physical flash of white light, followed by a crash of falling water bottles and an old DVD player. I saw my spirit guide pass like a shadow before my confused eyes, and then Wendell screamed before falling paralyzed to the floor. This group of combat soldiers and airmen scattered, most fleeing outside, while a few gathered around Wendell's stiffened body. A couple just stared at me, saying that they could see a ghost of a dead soldier behind me, coming through a door that opened slowly by itself. Success? Well, after all of the damage control was over, the place cleaned up, and egos repaired, I finally got to spend some time alone with Wendell. We were sitting on a bench one night at the Resiliency Center barbecue pit. The stars were blazing overhead, and the soft sounds of military generators and trucks moaned in the distance. "So what happened, Sergeant?" I reluctantly whispered. He had a instant look. "I was with her," he finally replied. "She and I were sitting, like on the steps of the ziggurat." "Do you regret the ritual?" "No, it was amazing. It just took a long time to get back into my body." With this experience in the back of my mind, I still intended to pursue the right, just hopefully in a more controlled and less destructive way. After all the post-deployment BS was taken care of, we settled back into life on the farm. It was not long before my son and I had assembled a working temple with our newly constructed altar of wood, thermatic triangle, 9-foot circle, and with all of the consecrated implements and assortments of incense. We researched sigils in old grimoires and started perfecting the art of contacting and communing with powerful entities from the other side. We were extremely successful. Maybe some other moon I will write about some of those encounters, especially with demonic lords. That would keep the listeners up at night for sure. This world is not like you believe. Now, during the same couple of years, an entire crowd of party-loving friends grew about my son and daughter until the regular group was about 9. We had booze, go-karts, and Xbox Mortal Kombat going non-stop at least one weekend a month. In that group was a Christian man and wife couple who were aspiring ghost hunters. They figured out that we were practicing some heavy occult magic and wanted to do a ghost hunt to see if our activities had brought in some spirits who clung to our temple and rites. I thought it would be fun and had no doubt that they would find more than they bargained for. So the night came, approximately in the fall. We had just done a ritual a few nights before where a dead man stood in our triangle explaining that he was still looking for his daughter who had passed from a childhood disease. We guessed that they were from the 1930s from their speech and appearance, and we later found their graves accidentally in a small country cemetery not 5 miles from the farm. So I assumed the ghost hunters with their spirit box, iPhone apps, and EVP recorders would catch him or someone like him. They wandered about for about an hour outside, but were disappointed in finding no signs. I was perplexed. "Well, do you want to try in the temple?" I offered. They reluctantly entered into the dark room where the kids and I had met with the otherworld entities many, many times. The air was thick and heavy, and the inky blackness only yielded to the candlelight on the altar and the dull glow of cell phones. "Ouija?" I proposed. Again, our ghost-hunting guest slowly relented, but I could tell the man, James, was reaching his cringe limit. We worked the board, resulting in an unremarkable display and energy barely reading on their devices. I was a little bit miffed. I mean, here we were, sitting on the floor of my temple, where through the broil of smoke had stepped visible spirits of all kinds and spoke to us. These specters were not the product of imagination or inebriation. They were answering the ancient magician's call. How could they not be registering on all of this ghost-hunting equipment? Then I had an idea. "Do you mind if I call the 4?" I asked. Everyone shrugged, thinking that it was just another dead end. I slipped into trance and whispered a simple enchant. Suddenly, the old ones arrived. As a thick darkness flowed from the ceiling, causing the dim lights to grow even fainter, the spirit box started at first to howl. It sounded like a distant animal in pain, but quickly became a circular screech, resembling the words of a black mass, but distorting and growling uncomfortably loud. The wife operating the box was frozen, while James' eyes darted back and forth in animalistic fear. "It has never done that. Ever. Never," she remarked nervously. James then shot to his feet and flung open the door and disappeared into the living room. "He is going to be mad," she said, gathering her things to follow after. My kids and I also casually left the temple to see them off. Their exit was immediate, and they never did another ghost hunt after that. Personally, I was delighted. That is just one paranormal mystery for your most excellent podcast. I respect your integrity, and if you want more witch confessions, I will happily share. These things are true, and I'm not sure why I'm sharing them so openly. Maybe I just don't care anymore. Merry meet, merry part. May we merry meet again. Love and light. Dawn, daughter of Heseti. Our next listener story comes to us from Ashley, and Ashley's story is called Sandman or Furryman? Ashley says, "Hi again, Nick. I was listening to one of your recent episodes involving a person waking up to something entering their room and it leaving peacefully after they gave in. This story sparked a creepy memory. When I was a kid, I had an interaction with some entity while sleeping in the living room. My parents set up our mattresses, and my sister and I had been indoor camping for a couple of days. In the middle of the night, on day 2 or 3, I was laying on my side with my back to the long and dark hallway. I woke up because I was cold, so I tried grabbing more of the blanket, but we didn't have extra. A few moments later, I felt something big sit on the mattress behind me, and then wrap themselves all over me. It felt like it was laying on me, but I could breathe just fine. It was also wrapping slightly around me like a moss or something. Fur was wrapping around the back of my head, legs, and arms. I was trying to think who was behind me, but I quickly realized that I do not know anyone who feels so large. To make this even stranger, this person was a very, very, very furry, hairy thing. I felt afraid, but it was warming me up, and I quickly began to fall back to sleep. When I woke up, I told my sister, but she didn't believe me. Her reaction made me dismiss it altogether, so I didn't tell my parents. Years and years later, my mom was telling me a story of when she was little and sleeping in the top bed of a bunk bed. She said she felt a giant furry man lay behind or on top of her. My mom is a lot more in tune with the paranormal world, coming from a family of witches in Central America, so she immediately knew this was not human and definitely not supposed to be in her bed, of all places. Struck with fear, she tried to get up, but it's like the weight of the furry thing gently pushed her efforts back to the bed, almost feeling like it was telling her to get back to sleep. Reluctantly, she stops fighting, gets comfortable, and falls back asleep. The only thing she vividly remembers about this thing is that it smelled of death. Her story made me immediately remember that I had the same encounter, and almost to the T. I told her and it freaked her out, thinking something or someone follows our family specifically. Neither of us have ever encountered this thing again, so knowing it's only happened once slightly settled our fears. It's not the only thing that's followed me or her from my grandmother, but those are stories for a different day. I wonder, has anyone out there experienced the same or similar furry thing hug or lay on you while you were asleep? Thanks again for all you do for the Paranormal Mysteries community. Stay safe out there, guys. Ashley. As we come to the end of tonight's episode, I appreciate all of you for being here, and a special thank you goes out to Mike, Marlene, Dawn, and of course, Ashley, for sharing their experiences. And if you've had a paranormal experience and would like to share your story, you may contact me through email, voice message, or on our website via the links in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you back here on Monday with our next episode. From everyone at Paranormal Mysteries, thank you for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it. Thank you all for joining me, and welcome to Paranormal Mysteries. I'm your host, Nick Ryan. On today's episode, I'll be discussing a dark humanoid, missing time, a possible alien abduction, and much more. But before we start, I'd like to thank Chica for their support and generosity. And remember that anyone can show their support by sharing and reviewing the podcast, as well as visiting us at patreon.com or buymeacoffee.com. And if you have a paranormal experience to share, you may contact me by email at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, through voice message at speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries, or on our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. And all of our information can be found in the show notes. And now, let's start the show with our first listener story of the night, which comes to us from Ella. And Ella's story is called Jacob. Ella says, "Dear Nick, this happened to me on the 23rd of January this year, 2021. My house has never had any paranormal activity, and I don't feel scared in my house. This may be long because it was so recent, and I won't skip any details. I am not a good sleeper. I have a sound machine and melatonin that I take to help, but I never sleep well. But tonight I was in a deep sleep when my dream started. It was a few of my childhood favorite TV characters in a typical situation for them. One of them got hit by this slow-moving, almost lightning bolt-like green thing, and her face started to melt on the left side. All of a sudden, I saw all of the characters, which there were 7 of, start walking down a hall with terrifying melted faces. I woke up with adrenaline pumping, and I started to look up videos on my phone of the characters to ensure myself it wasn't real. I watched a few and then decided to go back to sleep. It was about 2:30 a.m. on a school night, and right as I powered down my phone, from the corner of my room, I heard a woman's voice say, 'Jacob.' I freaked out and texted a group chat to 4 of my friends, but none of them responded, as it was around 2:40 a.m., so I wasn't surprised. I realized that I hadn't looked at where the sound had come from, so I turned toward the corner where a mirror and a stool are slightly covered by my desk, and I saw a crouched humanoid figure with the same melted face on the left side, and it was black, the kind of black that removes all light around it. After a few seconds, it lightened in color and became the same darkness as the room. I then rolled over and pulled the blanket over my head. A few minutes later, I heard the same voice say, 'Jacob,' one last time. My friend texted me back in the morning saying that it was a ghost looking for someone. I planned to do some research into the previous owners of the house. It was built in 1992, so it's not an old house. Thanks for listening to my story, and please keep up the hard work with the podcast. Sincerely, Ella." Our next story of the night comes to us from Derek, and Derek's story is called Dream, Time Loss, Abduction. Derek says, "Hey Nick, this event takes place when I was around 18 years old, and I'm almost 37 now. I was living with my brother at the time in a small studio-sized house with just a tiny room for the kitchen and a tiny room for the bedroom, and the bathroom was in the bedroom. One night, I, my brother, and his wife, which was his girlfriend at the time, were hanging out and just telling each other about our day. The next thing I remember, everyone was asleep, so I go to my bed that's next to the window. As I lay there, I'm looking out the window at the moon, and it's full and very bright. I think to myself, man, I hope this brightness doesn't keep me up. A few seconds later, I feel myself waking up, but I'm not in my bed. I'm on a bed or table or something that was slimy feeling, but it wasn't slimy, if that makes sense. I stand up and I'm in a dark room that looked like a cave at first. It was kind of chilly, but had a warm texture, and mist on the face as I move. I go towards this dull light that's in a hallway, and I notice that I'm not in a cave. As I look down this hallway, I see some beings walking, and they look just like the ones in that movie, Fire in the Sky. The hair on my neck instantly stood up, and my nose tingled like right before you cry. The beings looked back and tried to grab me. I don't know if they actually meant to harm me or not, but I tried to run. I was tripped by one of them, and when I fell I rolled on my side and kicked up as hard as I could, and kicked one of them down. The other one that had tripped me looked at the other being that I had kicked and then looked back at me, and I got up and started running as fast as I could. This all happened in probably seconds. As I ran, they chased me through the hallways, and I tried my hardest to get away from them, and I couldn't find a way out. It is like the movies where the people walk straight without turning, and they end up walking in a circle back to where they started. This thing that I was in looked organic, like it was grown and not built, as I didn't see any seams anywhere. I turned down one way and saw a window that kind of looked like a porthole window on a ship. I told myself, I'm going for it, and I ran as fast as I could and jumped right through the window. The weird thing is that when I jumped through the window out of their ship, I was also jumping through the window by my bed, and I landed on my bed almost like a portal. When my body hit the bed, I woke up, and the moon was gone, and I was breathing heavy like I had actually been running, and my lungs burned like I had been running in the cold. My legs were sore like after running 2 miles, and I was full of sweat. I suddenly got emotional for some reason, and my brother woke up and thought that I had been trying to sneak out or something. They didn't believe me, but I could see color and feel temperature and smell. None of my other dreams are that vivid. Keep up the good work, and thanks for listening to my story. Our next experience of the night comes to us from Grace, and Grace's story is called Dealing with the Paranormal for as Long as I Can Remember. Grace says, Hello. For as long as I can remember, I've always had a run-in with strange things. The very first paranormal encounter that I had was when I was about 3 or 4, and my mom was playing with my little cousin and I on our dining room floor. I got this weird feeling, and I looked up and saw a black smoky head going down into our basement. My mom saw it too, but she didn't want to freak us out, so she took us into the living room. Come to find out that the previous owner had died in my old room and spent most of his time in the basement. Later, my parents divorced, and my mom moved into my aunt's house. I have no recollection of this encounter, but my mom swears by it. One night I was screaming so loud that I woke the whole house up, and when my mom got to my room, there was a blanket in a perfect circle on the floor, and she said that I had this glazed look in my eyes. In the morning she asked if I was feeling okay, and when I said that I had no recollection, she started to get nervous. In 2nd grade, after my mom married my stepdad, we moved into his house, and I started to have more experiences. My bedroom was in the basement, and one night I woke up at about 3 in the morning, and I looked over my bed, and there was this young girl walking in circles in my room, with her hoodie shielding her eyes. I tried screaming for my mom and getting out of bed, but to no avail. After what seemed to be 20 minutes, but was actually probably an hour, I was able to go to my mom's room, and I told her what had happened. I think this may have been sleep paralysis. A couple days later, my mom was watching TV in the living room when she had a feeling that she was being watched. She looked over to the bathroom door, and there was this young girl peering at her, wearing her hoodie with her hood on. When my mom described the girl to me, she sounded exactly like the one that was in my room that one night. I then started sleepwalking and had terrible nightmares. It got so bad that my mom moved me into the upstairs bedroom, right across from hers. A few weeks later, she went to see a medium, and the lady told her that I had lived a past life. She said that I had a sister and that we were slaves, and that my sister was just trying to come back to me. I'm still not sure if I entirely believe in past lives, but when my mom was telling me this story, she said that we were chained at our ankles, and I immediately reached for my left one. My mom got this scared look on her face and said that the medium had told her that we were chained on my left ankle and her right. For a few years after this, the only way I could sleep was if I was facing the wall because I was scared of seeing something again, and I still do sometimes when I get a weird feeling. We have since moved from that house, and this new one doesn't give off as many bad vibes. Somehow I get a feeling where spirits are located without actually seeing them. I know that there is a woman that stands by our sink and looks out the window, and there is a girl on the stairs that peers over the edge and into the living room. There is also a man at the bottom of the stairs, and another man that stands in the corner outside my bedroom door. I haven't had as strong of senses since we moved, and I haven't seen anything in the past 2 or 3 years, and I'm 16 now. The last thing that I had seen was the girl on the stairs looking at my sister and I in the living room. Thank you so much for reading, and I hope I get to hear it on your podcast. Our next story comes to us from Kendra, and Kendra says, Dear Nick, I enjoy hearing the stories on your podcast and have been amazed at the similarities between them in many ways. Some of these have validated my own experiences. My first one happened when I was about 10 years old. I went to a small country church that had a large cemetery beside it. My small circle of friends and cousins would play in the cemetery. The plot on the corner was of a family named DeVore. We thought that sounded like a scary name, and we made up stories about the people that were buried there. We would put marks on popsicle sticks, placing them in the ground over the grave, and pretended to communicate with the dead by checking to see if they had moved. One Christmas, my family received a cheery Christmas card from a man named Bill DeVore. My parents knew of no such person and were puzzled. I was a little freaked out as none of our parents were aware of our childish games. I immediately called my little band and we made plans to investigate. None of us could recall the actual names on the gravestone, so during a break at the next practice for our Christmas program, the intrepid band set out, braving the dark night. We were charged with watching our 5-year-old cousin, so we held her hand and made our way to the grave. We were disappointed to see no Bill on the gravestone when my little cousin tripped on something. Picking her up under the glow of the dusk to dawn light, we froze. She had tripped over a shiny new temporary grave marker stuck in the lower corner of the plot. It had not been there before. On it was recorded the death of William DeVore. I don't recall the exact dates now, but I remember he was born in the 1800s and died in the early 1900s, and he was 28 years old. We returned to the little church building somewhat in shock, and we never played those games over the grave again. As an adult, I had stopped at a green light in the left-hand lane of a busy intersection. The cars ahead were too congested for me to go on without blocking the intersection, so I was stopped. An oncoming car turned in front of me to enter a parking lot, and apparently could not see another car flying up to the light in the right-hand lane. As I looked on in horror out my windshield and passenger window, I was incredulous to see the two vehicles pass through each other. I never shared this with anyone. I knew that no one would believe me, but then I heard some similar accounts on your podcast and have since shared this experience several times. Once, while working as a social worker in a hospital, I became aware that one of my coworkers was very ill. Somehow I just knew, and I began to ask others if she had said anything, but she had not. So I let it go. Driving to work one day, I heard in my head, "She's healed." I knew immediately what that meant. I know this was the Holy Spirit. I ran into her in the hallway later and told her, "I know you're going to think I'm crazy," and I then related the whole story. She became very pale, but smiled brightly. She had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. When they did a recent scan to determine course of treatment, it had disappeared. This was validation from God that she had been healed. She and I have never spoke of this since, but I am sure we both think of it often. I have a very dear friend who lost her mother when she was 9 years old, and this had a tremendous impact on her life. After the birth of my child, I was up on a chair hanging curtains in my house, and my friend came to mind. All of a sudden I was overwhelmed by a feeling. I felt a deep pressure in my chest. I doubled over and got down from the chair. It was not pain, just a really weird sensation. The next day when my baby was taking a nap, I went into my small office and sat down to write my friend. I dated the letter and began with, quote, "Now that I'm a mother, I think I understand what your mother must have felt when she knew she would be leaving you." End quote. And I then continued to write the letter as if I were her mother. I had never been to her childhood home, but I began describing watching her out the kitchen window with fondness as she played in the yard. I knew she was going to be fine. She was funny and strong, and would grow to be a fine woman. I then mailed the letter. When I did not get a response, I contacted her to see if I had somehow offended her. She said that she was still processing what had happened. When she got the letter, she was stunned and finally called her sister to go to the gravesite with her. She had to be certain. Sure enough, I had written the letter 21 years to the day that her mother died. My friend felt the symbolism of 21 to be a coming of age. After receiving this letter, at 30 years old, she felt a peace and a sense of resolution that she had never felt before. I have always been fascinated by the paranormal. As a Christian, I am careful to stay away from the dark forces because I know they are as real as the God Most High. But I read and listen to many things because I feel it equips me to know more about what is out there. Thank you for listening. This is a great service to allow people to share their stories. God bless you. Kendra. Our next experience of the evening comes to us from Brianna. And Brianna says, "Hi Nick, I am from Monterey County in California. I have always been fascinated with the paranormal since I can remember, and there have been many events in my life that have supported my belief in the other side as well. One particular story was probably one of the scariest nights of my childhood. My parents and I used to live with my aunt, and for as long as I can remember, that house has always given me the creeps. My room was located right in the middle between my aunt's room and my parents' room. It is important to know that my bedroom had hardwood floors and closets with mirror doors that faced straight towards the left side of my bed. One night I was having a terrifying nightmare, which started with me walking down a hall of a church. When I turned into a room, I noticed my younger cousin was on the floor, and a form of exorcism was being performed on her. Right as I entered the room, the demon, or whatever was captivating her body, came out of her and was heading towards me. But right before I thought it was going to enter my body, I woke up. When I woke up, I turned on my left side and I opened my eyes to see that my clock read 3:15 a.m. As soon as I saw the time, I knew that I had to try to go back to sleep before anything creepy happened. But what happened next is what truly terrified me. When I closed my eyes to go back to sleep, I heard a loud thump on the floor by the foot of my bed. I froze and waited to hear anything else before jumping to conclusions. As soon as I opened my eyes, my mirror closet doors started shaking, and my door, which was open a crack, flew open. At first I thought there was an earthquake, but nothing else in my room was moving. It was almost as if something was on my bed, saw that I had woken up, jumped off my bed, and ran out of my room. I was so petrified that I laid frozen in my bed for about a minute before I got up and ran to turn my lights on. There have been other unexplainable things that have happened to me in that house, and I should be sending more in soon. Thank you for your time and for sharing my experience." Our next story of the evening comes to us from Cassidy, which was sent in to us using our voicemail system. And Cassidy had this to say.
I would like to share my paranormal experiences with you because I honestly don't have really many people to share them with. So this started about 3 years ago, just a little over 3 years ago. I had an enlightening experience as I was looking in a mirror and I did hear voices, and the one voice was a child and said, "Can she hear us?" And my eyes widened and I had a very surprised look on my face, and well, another voice comes along and says, "Yes, she can hear us," because by the look on my face and the demeanor I had at the time of being surprised of hearing voices, of looking in a mirror, that, I did hear them. So I've kind of avoided mirrors since then. It's very tough for me to even want to look in the mirror because it was kind of an insane experience, and, well, it just really threw me off. I mean, I've been coming to terms with the fact that I am different than most people. I've known this since I was a young child, and, well, I didn't know how different from other people I really am. And so I would like to also share with you that my toes get pulled on often. I get nudged in the arm and the leg. I was watching a Geronimo Western on television, and all of a sudden I felt something tapping me very, very harshly on the back of my arm. This started 3 years ago, like I said. I believe that was an enlightening experience that I had, and well, since then it hasn't stopped, and it's becoming a norm for me, but it is also still very disturbing to me that there are things that are dark and following me and making my life less than manageable most of the time that don't like me. I would like to note that when I was born, I saved my grandfather's life. Had I not waited 2 weeks to be born and was born at the particular time that I was born at, he wouldn't have driven the car to the hospital at the time he had, and he had a widowmaker heart attack. Had he not arrived at the hospital when he had, he would have passed. That granted him 6 more years of life to enjoy his grandbaby, me, what he called his pride and joy. And, well, anytime I think of any loved ones that have passed on and I get pulled on, or my toes are very, very often pulled. It was a very disturbing experience at first, and like I said, I've gotten used to it because I know I'm different. I have always known I was different. I was born aware to things that most people aren't. I just have a very interesting personality, life, and I have a very, very open-minded, different view of the world around me. I can actually see through when people change into someone else, so to speak, or when a spirit comes through, their past life spirit, I suppose. I can see that in them. I kind of feel like I'm possibly maybe psychic in a way. I would actually love to delve into this category of study more if you would be so obliged to actually email me or get a hold of me somehow, or even just play me on your podcast. I'd be more than happy to come onto multiple podcasts and share experiences and share the way that I see the world, because I'm an Aquarius. I'm in the age of Aquarius, and, well, I see the world different than most do, like I've said. Sorry for repeating myself. I am nervous about just recording this and sending it because I don't know what's going to happen, if I'm going to get punished for sharing my experiences or what. But I would like to come onto another podcast, so if you would so kindly, at least on your podcast, I'm now a new listener, let me know that you would like to hear more experiences or more about how I see the world, and I would be more than happy to send you a message on here and record it for you.
Cassidy, thank you for sharing your experience. As tonight's edition of Paranormal Mysteries comes to a close, I appreciate all of you for listening, and a special thank you goes out to Ella, Derek, Grace, Kendra, Brianna, and Cassidy for sharing their experiences. And if you've encountered something unexplainable, you may contact me through email, voice message, or on our website via the links in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I'll see you back here on Monday the 29th as we uncover even more experiences involving paranormal mysteries. Thank you for joining me, and welcome to Paranormal Mysteries. I'm your host, Nick Ryan. On today's edition of From the Forest, I'll be discussing an evil cloaked entity, a pale crawler, shadow beings, little people, strange lights, poltergeist phenomena, and a strange creature in a cemetery. But before we start, I'd like to thank Jennifer for their support and generosity. And for anyone else who would like to support the show, you can do so by sharing and reviewing the podcast, as well as visiting us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. And if you have a paranormal story to tell, you can contact me by email at paranormalmysteriesPodcast@gmail.com, through voice message at speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries, or of course on our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. And remember that all of our links can be found in the show notes. Also bear in mind that there won't be any new episodes next week, but I will be posting updates on Instagram, so if you haven't already, be sure to follow me over there at Paranormal Mysteries Podcast. And now, let's start the show with our first listener story of the night, which comes to us from Nick, and Nick's story is called Strange Shadow Being. Nick says, "Hello, Nick. I'm still catching up on your episodes, but it's nice to know that there are many other people out there who have had these strange experiences like I had. And I love your podcast. My encounter first started when I was driving home after work a few weeks ago, and it was around 8:10 p.m., and it was almost pitch dark outside. I was driving down the same road I took every day, which has woods for miles across the one side of the road from work. But this time, it felt different. When I was driving down the road, I had that someone is watching me feeling, and it really made me uneasy. So I was driving down, and I noticed two glowing red eyes in the woods. They were small but noticeable in the darkness. I didn't really think much of it since it could have been a glare from eyes of an animal or something, so I continued down the road. A few minutes later, I was at a stop sign and I was looking to see if anyone was coming, and then I saw the eyes again. But this time the eyes were closer, and I saw a figure in the woods. It was just standing there staring at me, and I could tell that the figure was darker than the night was, since I could somewhat see through the woods, but I couldn't see it. All I saw were those eyes. I drove past it and went home, and it still keeps me up at night to this day." Our next story of the night comes to us from Katie, and Katie's story is called Shared Graveyard Sighting. Katie says, "Hello. When I was in high school, I took a trip with my best friend to visit her family in Boise, Idaho. One night, we decided to take a sunset drive to an old military graveyard in the hills. It was a small cemetery that sat on the side of a hill with a gravel road sitting at the bottom of a small valley. Next to the road and across from the graveyard was a small stream with trees and tall grass running parallel to it. We got out of the car and looked at the old gravestones, and we noticed how old they were, some people born in the early 1800s. We stayed there for some time, and the sun set and the full moon started to shine above us, lighting up most of the area around us. We then walked to the top corner of the cemetery, and we could see the whole valley below. I then noticed something moving quickly by the river, but I didn't say anything at first because I wanted to make sure I was really seeing it. It was a tall, dark figure running at a high speed along the river. "Do you see that?" I asked the other people I was with. My friend said yes and pointed at the exact place that it was running, and the two other ladies confirmed that they saw it as well. We all stared as it turned towards us, ran across the road, ran up to the bottom corner of the cemetery, and then disappeared. I started to think nothing of it because it was probably just someone playing a trick, but then I started to think about it more. The grass that the figure was running through was probably 4 or 5 feet tall, and we could see most of their body. The height of the figure and the speed at which it was moving was inhuman. We all left immediately after that. We talked about it on the way home, and everyone was freaked out, and I couldn't sleep that night. This was the only sighting I've ever had, and I still have no idea what it could have been. Thank you for reading. Katie. Our next story of the night comes to us from Caleb, And Caleb says, "Hello. I found your podcast only recently. I just listened to episode 80 from August 2020. I had something happen to me back in July 2013 when I was 16 at Loring Air Force Base. I never really knew what it was, and I never found anything that was a perfect match or that was overly similar. I kind of guessed that maybe I imagined the whole thing, but it's always been in my head like a bad memory that you can't forget. I listened to this episode of your podcast, and to my amazement, a few of the stories depicted what I saw almost to a T. I only ever told my wife, which was my girlfriend at the time, what I saw, and she believed me. But I was a kid, so I wasn't going to tell my parents, as they would have just told me that it was nothing anyway. I feel as though I should tell someone else what I saw back then, since I haven't seen it again. But I also won't stay overnight at the runway again." In July of 2013, I was helping my father with the land speed races at Loring Air Force Base in Maine. We had a camper that we used for our registration for racers. We had somewhere around 80 people that long weekend, and nothing was out of the ordinary for the first day. Loring is known as a bit of a creepy place because it's old and run down, and it has a bit of a blacked-out history that no one really knows everything about. I haven't seen weird things that I couldn't explain growing up or even now, and this is the only thing that I just don't understand. This Saturday night at the end of the race day, I asked my parents if I could stay in the camper, which was at the top of the track. It was just off the starting line at the uppermost point of the runway. Nothing was weird or abnormal that day, and after my parents left, I walked down the runway about halfway, 1.5 miles from the camper. It was about dusk and starting to get dark, but visibility was still about a mile. I stopped where I could see an old watchtower 60 feet into the woods off the right side of the runway. It was old and dilapidated, just what you'd expect. But just off to the right of that was something that just seemed off, like a whitish-gray colored head that seemed to just ever so slightly sway like a branch in a light breeze. I walked closer to try and get a better look, and as I got to the edge of the pavement, I looked at the ground and picked up a piece of broken tar to throw. But when I looked back up, I couldn't see it anymore. I tossed the chunk where I last saw it, and I heard the chunk impact something, but it didn't sound like it hit a tree, but almost like it hit extremely soft earth, like when you dig a hole and fill it with loose soil. Mind you, at this point, I was only about 40 to 50 feet away from where the tar impacted, but after it hit, I didn't hear anything, and I chalked it up to just my imagination, and I proceeded to walk the 1.5 miles back to the camper. I talked with some racers and had dinner with a few of them, and around 9:30, I had gone to bed. I woke up, like fully awake, at 1:18 a.m. with this odd feeling that something was outside. I had windows on both sides of the bed, and I took a quick look out the right side and then the left. It was a super bright full moon, but I didn't see anything. I looked at my phone, but I hadn't charged it, so I decided to get up and look at the clock that we had on the counter next to the radio charger. I decided to stay up for a bit, and I had a snack and then sat at the table while looking out the windows. After roughly 10 minutes, I saw this figure. It was a little far to really make it out at first, but it was big and tall as hell. It was walking parallel to the runway and making its way toward a fenced-off area that stored old military equipment like Humvees and whatnot. It got within what looked like 10 feet of the fence and stopped. It was pale whitish-gray, and its skin looked stretched, almost like it grew too fast, with overly long arms, thin but well-defined muscle mass. But its face is what honestly still scares me. It had black sunken eyes with an almost non-existent nose and a huge mouth. It didn't have lips, but its teeth weren't pointed and sharp. It almost looked like they were all human canines that were blunt, but slightly pointed. I was dumbfounded, scared, and unsure of what to do. I felt paralyzed as I watched this thing move slowly, but it seemed like it was calculating something. It walked out completely onto the runway and not 50 feet from my camper where I could see every part of this creature. It had to have been 7 feet tall, and it had long arms with long fingers, but it only had 4 on its left, and all 5 were present on its right. It just stood there looking around like it was exploring something new, and I watched it for maybe 2 minutes. Then it opened its huge mouth, and I expected a scream or something terrible like in the movies, but nothing came out. Right after that, it turned and looked what felt like right through me, and then it walked slowly away. It got to the fence and it was eye level with the top. It put its hands over the razor wire on top and climbed over like it was nothing. It got over and walked way out of my view. This whole thing felt like there was no way I just saw that. This whole encounter only lasted about 5 whole minutes, but I will never forget that day. I can't stay out there at night, but even with all my fear, I don't feel as if it was a threat to me or anyone else. The whole time it just felt as if it was curious of us being out there. I never saw it again, but I will always remember what it looked like. I know this was a lot to read, but I felt that you might want to hear my story, and it feels nice to tell someone else. Thanks again, Caleb. For anyone that's interested, episode 80 that Caleb was referring to is called Pale Crawlers and Creepy Humanoids, and I've added a link to it in the show notes. Our next story of the evening comes to us from Michelle, and Michelle's story is called Incident at Guelph Lake and Poltergeist Experience. Michelle says, like a lot of your listeners and people who have described their experiences, I have had a great many encounters with the paranormal during my life. I will send you 2 descriptions of events that have occurred to me, and possibly send you more in time. The UFO and poltergeist events occurred from the 15th of September 2019 to the following September of 2020. The other event was an encounter of the third kind that I had in 1978, which I reported to an Australian Newfound organization for UFO investigations many years after the experience, but I felt it was a significant encounter and should be recorded. Apologies if one of these is rather long, but the poltergeist experience went on for an entire year, so a lot happened during that time. I would also like to thank you for your podcast and the way you provide a platform for ordinary people to record their otherworldly experiences, and they are not lost to the collective experience. I also have only just discovered your podcast and love listening to other people's stories, so I don't feel like such a weirdo after all. I have had many and varied paranormal experiences throughout my life, several significant UFO encounters, one an encounter of the third kind, and a lot of extremely strange events. I had worked as a registered nurse in a county town 117 kilometers from my town of Collie, Western Australia, on weekends for approximately a year before my most recent encounter. I had to leave work extremely early in the morning at 0400 to get to work at 0700, and had to travel a long way through dense bushland which was populated with kangaroos, which had a habit of jumping out in front of vehicles. So I would travel around 60 kilometers, as they are more active in the dark. This morning was in the middle of winter, so not only was it dark, but it was also extremely foggy. A pipeline follows virtually the whole length of the road from Collie to the outlying town of Narragain, sometimes veering off from the road in certain places, but generally sticking closely most of the way. As I was traveling, I saw what appeared to be bright headlights off to the left side, some way off in the bush. But then the headlights turned and quickly moved towards the road, crossing the road some distance in front of me through the mist at speed, and then off into the bush to the right. I was shocked as I knew that there was no road that crossed the pipeline at this point, and that the pipeline continued unbroken on the right side of the road, so that no vehicle could possibly have driven straight across the road and then disappeared into the forest. The second incident occurred about a year later traveling on that same road, again traveling alone in the dark bush, and another vehicle was approaching a little way off. Of course, I had my high-beam headlights on for utmost visibility, so I turned them down to normal as the other vehicle was approaching so as not to blind the oncoming driver. The moment I dimmed my lights, the oncoming headlights blinked out completely. There was no vehicle to be seen at all. No sign of any vehicle at all. Just the dark bushland and me in the car. The third incident occurred about 6 months later and was the most frightening of all. I thought I had seen an approaching vehicle in the distance, but the road was winding, so I lost sight of the light as I traversed a bend. Strangely, I did not see the oncoming vehicle reemerge as I continued to drive, but then I became suddenly aware of an extremely bright light just above a tall group of trees, again off to the left-hand side of the car, but high up behind the tree canopy. I began to get very frightened, and my pulse and breathing began to race. I had to consciously concentrate on the road and try not to panic, being that I was all alone in the middle of nowhere in the dark bush. I kept driving and looking back to see if this light was following me, and to my very great relief, it seemed to have gone. This was the extent of this encounter. However, from that night onward for the next year, I was plagued by very extreme poltergeist events that unfolded at my home. It began with loud rhythmic banging on my front verge at all hours of the night, as if someone was drumming on a council rubbish bin. This repeated for several weeks, becoming more regular. I even went out several times in the middle of the night to investigate, but there was never anyone to be seen. But I never placed any paranormal significance to the events. Over the course of these few weeks, the banging noise seemed to move closer to the front of my house, until one night the banging was on my front veranda, which is wooden, and then the next night I was woken by extremely loud banging on the French doors of my bedroom that lead to the veranda. This is where it began to be really frightening. The next night I was jolted awake and found that the lower part of my body was being levitated off the bed, but I was able to yell out the words, "Stop," and "No," and whatever was assailing me immediately left the room through the closed French doors and out onto the veranda, but began loudly and rhythmically banging on the veranda floor. After this event every night, continuously throughout the night I was physically poked and jolted awake every time I fell asleep for nights on end, until I fled to my father's house. This was effective the first time, but of course I had to return home eventually, and the torment would continue again. After the first successful escape to my father's house, the second time I was followed by this entity, and then was further terrorized at my father's house, so eventually I just returned home. I was also having to take my cat with me, who was also being terrorized. Apart from being physically poked and shaken, this thing would constantly jump on the bed or shake the bed, which is large and solid. The cat would be terrified and jump off the bed, and then run and hide. Another manifestation was extremely loud noises around my ceiling and cornices, creaking and popping noises, or pinging noises, along with banging on my tin roof incessantly. I have lived in my fabulous old home for 10 years peacefully, and have always been very happy that it was not haunted in any way. I would also be woken during the night often by a loud, almost electronic noise, unlike anything I'd ever heard before in my life, which was always associated with this entity approaching closely, and which I could only ever hear when asleep, and whilst waking up as this thing drew closer. I never saw it clearly, but on several occasions when I was aware that this thing was in front of me, and whilst laying on my side with my eyes closed, I could see whirling energy in front of me, often with sickening hues. I could, however, see a lot of movement at my periphery of vision on many occasions, and shadowy figures, not human in any way, often very low to the ground. On one occasion, at the height of the haunting, it grabbed me a few times, once on the back of the leg in my lounge room whilst lighting the fire, and several times whilst attending clients in their own homes. It would grab my arm to let me know that it was around. It also grabbed my cat on several occasions, causing her to jump wildly in fright, turning on her axis. During this time, I felt very helpless in being able to protect my cat, as I had to leave her alone in the house when I went to work. But thankfully the activity seemed to lessen drastically during the daylight hours. Another worrying manifestation was being constantly touched by some sort of energy on all areas of my body, but especially my lower legs all through the day, even whilst driving, which I do as I am a community nurse. The only way I can explain it was as if something had been able to attach itself to my etheric body, and I was aware of it in my energy field wherever I went. After this had gone on for several months, I eventually asked my neighbor if he had heard any strange noises at night, and he confirmed that he had heard some loud rhythmic banging noises back when this had started on the verge, but he was mystified as to their cause. I even experienced loud banging on my nursing car when I was parked at my clinic on one occasion. At the height of the activity, I had an Aboriginal person in my clinic for wound care, and loud rapping occurred on the clinic door, but there was of course no one there, and impossible for anyone to disappear down a hallway and out the door in the moment it took to open the door. Of course, I knew exactly what it was, and the Aboriginal man also knew, as he immediately stated, that was a spirit. I tried many things to clear the energy in my house without success. many sagings with only minimal effectiveness the first time, when the entity must have fled into a cupboard in my spare room and began banging loudly in the cupboard as if angry. I opened the cupboard and let the smoke go in there also, but after that it would just come back after the smoke had cleared. I paid a prominent medium to come to my house, and he stated that he probably couldn't help me and proceeded to ask me if I had experienced any UFO events in the recent past. I had a paranormal investigative team come and spend the night at my house, and they recorded some voice data and orbs on film and a lot of movement as their sensors were set off continuously. But this did not help. I even asked the local Catholic priest to come cleanse my house, even though I am not Catholic, but I was becoming desperate. This actually made matters worse. After reaching back out to Michelle regarding her experiences, she had this to say. The poltergeist experience was very terrifying and extremely physical in its presence over an extended time, and I experienced its presence and banging on a nightly basis, and sometimes several times a night. There were possibly only 1 or 2 occasions over the period of a year when it did not happen. What I did not mention in my correspondence to you was that I was also experiencing extreme menopause symptoms where I believe I was giving off so much energy in the form of hot flashes continuously. I believe this contributed to my problem, just as prepubescent girls and sometimes boys can attract this type of energy. I had always resisted seeking hormone replacement therapy, but my terror sent me running to the doctor. I believe it was the combination of hormone therapy and a conscious regimen of completely ignoring the phenomenon which led to its very gradual diminishing over time. In regards to the Close Encounter article, this was an experience I encountered as a much younger person, but I have had many ongoing UFO encounters throughout my life. I will send you more experiences soon. I have posted Michelle's magazine article which describes her encounter of the third kind on our forum. And of course, you can find a link to it in the show notes. Our next story of the night comes to us from Peter, and Peter's story is called Little People. Peter says, "Hello again, Nick. Thank you for telling the world about what happened to me in Civil War Ghost in episode 180. I had a strange encounter while visiting my family in Norway when I was very young. I was about 5 or 6 years old. It was very wooded there and very nice. Playing out back by myself is not something my grandparents liked me to do. My mother just looked puzzled at them, so she sat outside reading her book. I remember hearing a rustling sound just beyond the yard in the woods and seeing the tall grasses move about. Then I heard a small but gravelly type voice saying something. As I strained my eyes to see what it was, just at the edge of the tall grass, I thought I saw a small, old-looking, 8-inch tall, very fat, dark-skinned man looking right back at me. As soon as he realized we made eye contact, he ran off. I yelled for my mom, but she couldn't care less. I know what I saw. When I told my farfar and morfar, that's grandfather and grandmother in Norwegian, they yelled and screamed at my mother for not watching me more carefully and not believing the stories of the little people or hill people. Thank you, Nick, and all the listeners." Our next story comes to us from Craig, and Craig's story is called The Cloaked Entity. Craig says, "Hey Nick, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to start by saying I'm a huge fan of the podcast. Having this podcast allows people to express their diabolical, unexplainable, and uncanny paranormal experiences to the world, adding more validity to strange phenomena not yet explained by scientific reasoning. The following story I'm about to tell you takes place at a location known as Hell's Church, located in Canton, Georgia. The year was 2015, and at the time I was a freshman in college and was visiting home in Atlanta for summer break. I, my friend Sam, and my friend Will decided to look up haunted locations to investigate around the state, as we were very bored on this particular night. To give some additional context, I had recently befriended Sam due to our infatuation for the paranormal, something I've always been interested by. Will, on the other hand, was more skeptical, but nonetheless tagged along with us on investigations. Anyway, we did some research and found Hell's Church in Canton. We thoroughly looked up the history and reasoning for its haunted reputation, and found that it was the site of satanic rituals where a boy was killed in the early 1990s. The boy is alleged to haunt the premises, as well as reported demonic entities that were conjured through the satanic occult activity during the 90s. Additionally, the cemetery that resides across the street from the church contains a large oak tree with many large branches that protrude from it. One of these branches was used to hang individuals from the town in the 1800s. So after this thorough research, we decided to hop in my car and drive to Hell's Church with intent to stay there for about 30 minutes and then leave. After 25 minutes of driving, we reached the single-lane road that led us to the church. The road was dimly lit and narrow with heavy vegetation on both sides. And after what seemed like 10 minutes of driving down this ominous road, we reached the church. The church is small and white with one floor, and there is a streetlight that illuminates the entire property and a dirt road that's located behind the church. These dirt roads lead down a hill into the woods where a baptizing pool is located. This pool is the location of where the demonic rituals would take place, and still had old candle wax and pentagrams embossed into the concrete slabs. I parked my car under this one streetlight next to the church, and we proceeded to walk around the property. For the first 10 minutes, all of us felt no fear, saw or heard anything unusual. Then, about 5 minutes before leaving, we all reacted to the overwhelming scent of sulfur, kind of similar to rotten eggs. I must mention that being in the south, tree frogs and crickets are very active during the summer at night, and shortly after the pungent odor began, all the crickets and tree frogs stopped chirping, almost as if someone or something scared them. So during all of this, Sam, Will, and I began to walk up the road toward my car after investigating the church cemetery for several minutes. As we got within 25 feet of my car, I got the sensation that something was watching us from the pitch-black darkness of the woods to the left of my car, parked on the side of the street. All of a sudden, Will then stops walking and stares to the left of my car, which causes Sam and I to also gaze in that direction. Upon looking, all three of us witnessed a misty, tall, jet-black shadow with what appeared to be a cape moving in front of my car and across the street at a high rate of speed. This entity had no visible limbs or facial features, and it just glided across the street. The dark cloak it was wearing dragged several feet behind its body as it moved. The cloaked entity then disappeared once it crossed the road and into the forest, adjacent to my vehicle. To make this situation even creepier, once the figure disappeared, we could hear what sounded like the crunching of leaves coming from the edge of the woodline where we saw this figure enter, even though it was no longer visible. I looked at Will and Sam and said, "What the hell was that?" They both looked at me with pale faces of dismay before Sam said, "There was a demon that just ran across the road, and I think that's our cue to leave now." We ran towards the car as fast as we could, and I cranked up the car, and we sped away. Not a word was spoken between the three of us given the horror we had just endured, until I started getting a headache. The weird thing about this headache is that Will and Sam also started to receive headaches at the same time as myself, until after 10 minutes when the headaches began to subside. That night, we went back to Sam's house, talking about what we had gone through, but couldn't shake the fear of dread and anger for no apparent reason after leaving the church property and seeing this cloaked entity. We didn't sleep that night, and for weeks I would have trouble falling asleep, and on occasion felt what I would describe as a heaviness in my room before falling asleep. To this day, I don't have an explanation for the cloaked figure, the foul smell, or the eerie silence that occurred before the entity manifested. One thing I do know is that this was a demon, and it did not want us there. I hope you will share my story, and have a blessed day. Best regards, Craig. As we come to the end of tonight's episode, I appreciate all of you for tuning in, and a special thank you goes out to Nick, Katie, Caleb, Michelle, Peter, and Craig for sharing their experiences. And if you've had a paranormal experience that happened in or near the forest, you can contact me through email, voice message, or on our website, and these links can be found in the show notes. Until next time, I hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday the 27th with our next episode. From everyone at Paranormal Mysteries, thank you for listening, and remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.
Finally, a bed that senses snoring and automatically responds. Meet the Ergo Smart Base from Tempur-Pedic, our first system that detects snoring, then automatically adjusts by raising the bed. Get your best sleep, all night, every night. For a limited time, save up to $500 on select adjustable mattress sets and experience the deep, undisturbed sleep of Tempur-Pedic. Get full offer details at TempurPedic.com.
Finding the right person for the job isn't easy. Just ask someone who hired their personal trainer as a caterer.
All right, folks, let's keep this line moving. You there with the tongs. Picking up one Duchess potato at a time will not cut it at my catering table. Drop and give me 50.
But if you've got an insurance question, you can always count on your local Geico agent. They can bundle your policies, which could save you hundreds.
Okay, this is what we call the wild mushroom and asparagus dip, and press. Come on, let's get those plates above your heads.
For expert help with all your insurance needs, visit geico.com/local today.
Thank you all for joining me, and welcome to Paranormal Mysteries. I'm your host as always, Nick Ryan. On today's episode, we'll be discussing scary movies coming to life, missing time, a haunted house, a pact with the devil, and much more. But before we start, I'd like to thank everyone for their support and their generosity. And of course, for anyone who would like to support the show, you can do so by sharing and reviewing the podcast, as well as visiting us at patreon.com/paranormalmysteries or at buymeacoffee.com/paranormal. And if you have your very own paranormal story to tell, you can contact me by email at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com, through voice message at speakpipe.com/paranormalmysteries, or on our website at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. And remember that you can find all of our links in the show notes. And now let's begin our Friday with our first listener story of the night, which comes to us from Mary. And Mary's story is called, "It Is Never Just a Movie." Mary says, "Hi Nick, thank you so much for reading Baseball Boy on the show. I am truly humbled. As promised, I am writing you about another one of my experiences, and honestly, the most horrifying. In October of 2009, I was 19 years old. I have always been open to the paranormal, and often during those days would go exploring places known to be haunted. So I found it rather strange that a movie, of all things, would trigger such a series of events. The movie Paranormal Activity aired for the first time in our area, and I was so excited to go and see it. At the time, much like the Blair Witch Project in the 90s, I did not know that it wasn't real. I was seriously terrified, and at the end of the movie, I felt nauseated and I felt chills run up my spine. I never had that kind of reaction to a movie, but I learned quickly that this would not be the last time that this would happen. It started out as things disappearing, feeling as if I was being watched, and sleeping with the TV on, which is something that I've always hated. My friend that had gone with me to the movie had also started experiencing weird things. My life at the time felt like it was spiraling out of control. I fell into a deep depression and could not hardly make myself go to my college classes. Prior to this, I had experienced depression, but nothing like this. My cat started sitting at the end of my bed and staring into the corner, and there were times that he would hiss or growl. There was even one night while I was brushing my teeth in the restroom that my doorknob began violently twisting, only for me to find that there was nothing on the other side. What did I do? Did I bring it home? Was it the movie? Surely not, I would think to myself. But then it happened, and I saw him. I was driving home from my friend's house and almost to our drive when a man with a hat and a long trench coat casually stepped out in front of me. I was going rather fast and I slammed on my brakes. Everything that was in the seat was now on the floor. I was shaking and crying and thinking that I had just about hit a person, but as I looked in front of my car, he vanished before my eyes. I hurried home and went straight into the house and told my mom, who dismissed it. I had terrible nightmares,